Hey guys, welcome to Boxing Squared for boxing news and views from around the internet. Nick Webb has emerged victorious in the Ultimate Boxer tournament in Manchester, the heavyweight edition, beating out Mark Bennett in the final, winning 30-27 on all three judges' scorecards. Good final, good event overall, and I'll come to the quarterfinals and finals in a moment because action galore. There was some upsets, a very good semi-final involving Mark Bennett and Josh Sandland, but we'll start with the final first. This was an event Nick Webb was coming into, the Ultimate Boxer tournament, after a full year out of the ring. After he was defeated by Kamil Sokolowski by knockout in 2018, he took the rest of that year off, and also until this tournament, he had not been in the ring. So he came into it, obviously with some expectations, one of the more heavily favoured fighters to win it, but he wasn't exactly a clear favourite. So there were other guys, Kamil Sokolowski, who defeated Webb, Jonathan Pilata, Mark Bennett, a bit of a dark horse, but there was a number of guys in an evenly matched tournament that could have won this one. But ultimately, his experience paid off in the tournament. You could see in some of his fights where he was able to use the jab, use his experience, ring craft. It wasn't just a 3-round sort of shootout for him in some of these fights. And he got the first stoppage of the event, and I'll come to that soon. But the final, Mark Bennett, it really was the jab that won this fight for him. Unlike some of the other fights in the tournament where it was just sort of brawls to some extent, this was behind the jab, just shutting Bennett out to some extent. He was unable to sort of get his offense going because he was completely peppered with the jab throughout. But it wasn't without some trouble for Webb, though. The second round, he eats a big right hand, overhand right from Mark Bennett, and Webb looked all over the place for about 10 seconds. But ultimately, he ended up finishing the stronger of the two in the round, battering Bennett at different points in that second round. But it was the jab that was the key weapon for Webb in this fight, nullified Bennett to a large extent. And as the fight wore on, Bennett, who'd been in all three rounders throughout the tournament, so he went 9 rounds, the only person to do so in the tournament, he started to really tire, and he looked almost out on his feet towards the end of that third round. He wasn't able to get going. Webb was able to keep him off him and ultimately get the decision 30-27. You could have actually had that maybe 29-28. I think there was one round. It was relatively close, but ultimately Webb got the decision on the judges' scorecards. He walks away with 50 grand, and after a terrible year in 2018, he was starched by Dave Allen, starched by Kamil Sokolowski to have to pick himself up, enters this tournament and walks away with the prize money and the glory. So good on Nick Webb, makes a successful return to the ring, 3 wins, one of them a stoppage, and I'll come to that in a moment. As for Mark Bennett, he put up a valiant effort in the final, just came up a bit short. Ultimately, he was the more tired fighter coming into the final, and I think that showed to some extent because Webb got a stoppage in the semi-finals. In both of his quarter and semi, Bennett really had to work hard, expended a lot of energy. So he came into that final a little bit depleted already, but ultimately wasn't able to overcome the slicker boxer. But good effort from Mark Bennett in this tournament. So getting to the other action, and it certainly was all over the map in this Ultimate Boxer tournament. We'll start with the semi-finals first, work our way back, because there was upset galore. You had Jonathan Pilata upset in the quarterfinals, as well as Kamil Sokolowski also upset. 2 of those guys tournament pre-favorites, but obviously in this sort of format doesn't often count for much because it's a 3-round shootout of sorts, and in some fights we saw that, others not so much. Jonathan Pilata never really seemed to get out of first gear. But starting with the semi-finals, because these were action-packed, you actually had Nick Webb versus Danny Whittaker. That was the first stoppage of the tournament in the second to last fight, the second semi-final. Nick Webb unloading some power shots. It was pretty messy early on, both sort of working up in close, but Webb, the weight of his shots, you could tell that was troubling Whittaker pretty much from the outset. Ultimately, towards the end of round 1, he lands a beautiful uppercut followed by a left hook, so good combination. Whittaker goes down. Looks like he's all over the place, struggling to sort of get his legs back under him, and the referee sees this, comes in and waves it off. And that was the first stoppage, as I noted. It was all decisions in the quarterfinals, but we'll get to that. The other semi-final, Mark Bennett versus Josh Sandland, probably the fight of the night in terms of action and drama. It was the first 2 rounds, it was all one way. Mark Bennett basically dominant over Sandland. He drops him in the first round. He also drops him in the second round after a furious exchange. A lot of action in this fight. Sandland was coming off second best for most of the fight. And in those first 2 rounds, it was all Mark Bennett. But then you come into round 3, Mark Bennett, who's obviously expended a lot of energy, really pummeling Sandland. He's on the end of it this time with Josh Sandland coming forward. It was an incredible round. It was an incredible fight. Sandland just swinging for the fences, catching Bennett almost at will, but unable to drop him, unable to stop him. And that was part of the issue here, because he needed a knockout to win this fight. And he was giving it everything. He kept coming, but ultimately Bennett able to see out the round, and it was a fantastic round, fantastic fight. And even late in that third round, Sandland went headfirst through the ropes. Sandland's up on Bennett's chest. Bennett slips to the side, and then Sandland headfirst through the ropes. This is in the final 20 seconds. He finally makes it through, but he lost a few seconds there. But ultimately, Bennett sees out the round and the fight, gets through to the final, as we know. It was a great round. One of the best rounds of Ultimate Boxer, as the commentators were saying, and I certainly enjoyed it. The whole fight overall, Sandland showed a lot of heart, determination, and grit. Just wasn't able to mix it with the bigger, heavier clubbing punches from Mark Bennett. But there was upset galore in the quarterfinals, and a lot of these fights, could have gone either way. Danny Whitaker beats Jonathan Pilata, the touted prospect who's out of the Frank Warren stable. He came into this unbeaten, was expected to potentially win the tournament, but he's beaten by Danny Whitaker. 29-28 on all 3 judges' scorecards. And the thing that cost Pilata in that fight, 3 rounds, he just couldn't get out of first gear. He was just boxing at a certain pace, wasn't rushed, and ultimately that cost him, because in that final round, Whitaker was able to pour it on strong, especially in that final minute. And that really, I think, in my view, secured him the win. Maybe Pilata was trying to box smart and try to get a decision and save and conserve energy, but ultimately, whatever his strategy was, it backfired. He did start strong, good jab, he landed some nice shots, but Whitaker was able to just, because of the low volume, and even though Pilata was picking his shots nicely, the low volume allowed Whitaker into the fight to land some eye-catching rounds himself. And, 29-28, it sort of backfired being in this tournament for Pilata. The strategy in that fight, it didn't seem to work. Either he doesn't have a second gear or he was unable to find it. And the other big upset from the quarterfinals was Josh Sandland versus Kamil Sokolowski. Sokolowski, the most experienced fighter in this tournament, unable to beat Josh Sandland. It just sort of seemed to be his pace. He wasn't able to keep it up, and especially in that third round saw a lot of holding from a visibly drained Sokolowski. It wasn't a furious pace in the first couple of rounds, but by the third round he was just holding pretty much the whole time, and in my view that cost him. He loses 29-28 on all 3 judges' scorecards. The first couple of rounds I split them, but that third was the difference, and there was no big shots landed by Sokolowski in the fight, but yeah, that third round, it certainly did cost him, and he was out. So Pilata and Sokolowski, they were out in the quarterfinals, a couple of unfancied fighters making it through. And rounding out the other quarterfinals, Mark Bennett versus Jay McFarlane. This was a very close fight. It was a split decision win to Bennett, 29-28, 29-28, and 28-29. It could have gone either way. Both came out quite well, swinging. McFarlane, the slicker of the 2 boxers, he was able to have a pretty good round. I gave him that first round, but he did start to tire somewhat in the second round, and they were both swinging for the fences in that third round. Hard to call. I could have gone either way on that one. The other fight in the quarterfinals, Nick Webb obviously versus Chris Healy. Webb getting a split decision as well. Very tactical start to the fight. It opened up later on the first round. Webb probably getting better of the action that first round. Chris Healy, he had a good second round, and the third round also very seesaw. Webb was eating some shots, he was looking more urgent though, and Healy seemed to fade a little bit later in that round, so Nick Webb nicks that one. So Bennett and Webb, who fought in the final, didn't have an easy route to it. They had to come through, obviously, close fights early on, and this was one of the hallmarks of this tournament. I said ahead of the tournament that I found it very hard to call a winner because I could see maybe 4 or 5 guys winning it. And ultimately, it sort of panned out that way. A couple of the favourites dipped out early in the tournament, and it wasn't just all one way for one fighter. All of them had tough and difficult fights. For Bennett, because he had to go through 2 3-rounders to get to the final, he maybe did it a bit tougher than Nick Webb. He took a little bit more punishment along the way too. But overall, it was a good tournament. It was fun to watch. It was evenly matched. And I know not everyone will agree with some of the results. I saw there were some people saying Sokolowski was robbed, but they were close fights, and he didn't do much in the third round of that one. Obviously, Pilates, some people thought he won as well, but that was a case he couldn't get out of first gear, and Danny Whitaker took advantage in that final round. Big combination with about 30 seconds to go. Probably snagged him that fight. Took Pilates O. I enjoyed it. What did you make of it? Drop a comment loud and often. Hit like, hit subscribe. Follow me on Twitter. Boxing_squared. I'm out.